Welcome to the Alien Dusk, the world of science fiction, where extraordinary tales come to life. Enjoy the journey. Psi-6 was a world that defied comprehension. From the moment the planet was detected, it captivated every scientist, every explorer, and every dreamer with a thirst for the unknown. Positioned far beyond the reach of most spacefaring civilizations, it was an enigma wrapped in the most seductive of mysteries, a lush, verdant world alive with secrets. The planet was saturated with powerful, erratic magnetic pulses that disrupted long-range scans and blocked communications, leaving every effort to map it in vain. Only its wild, pulsating energy could be felt through the vibrations that rattled every ship or probe that dared approach. The surface of Psi-6 was a chaotic beauty. Towering bioluminescent trees stretched high into the sky, their leaves shimmering like emerald fire. Below, the thick jungle hummed with a life of its own, a sound not quite animal, not quite mechanical, an unsettling reminder of the mysteries that hid within. The ancient ruins scattered throughout the jungle were silent, yet omnipresent, their alien architecture defying explanation. They were relics of the Zenith, a race whose technology had once spanned the stars, but had vanished long before any records were made. Yet the remains of their civilization still clung to the planet. Each ruin, each strange structure, spoke of an intelligence far beyond humanity's. The air crackled with energy, and the ground seemed to pulse underfoot, as if the planet itself were alive, a silent watcher observing those who dared to land. Any attempt to scan deeper into the planet's surface was thwarted by the enigmatic magnetic storms that swirled on its surface. The deeper secrets of Psi-6 were hidden beneath a veil of wild beauty, a paradox of nature's brilliance and an alien past. Miles Carter had always been a man at ease with solitude. An exobiologist of uncommon skill, he was the type to find peace in silence, to seek meaning in places that others avoided. While most were driven by the political noise and turbulence of Earth, Miles found solace in the wild, in the untouched frontiers that stretch far beyond the limits of civilization. His mind was calm, his focus razor-sharp, yet there was a constant pull in him, an urge to escape. Earth's politics were a festering mess, a maze of power struggles that sapped his energy and will. On Psi-6, Miles wasn't just an observer. He wasn't merely here for the science. He was here to lose himself in the unknown. The alien jungles whispered promises of discovery and a new kind of freedom, one that Earth had denied him. Miles had been on dangerous worlds before, but none like this. His intellect, honed through years of study in hostile terrains, was his greatest tool. Yet there was something different about Psi-6, a feeling that both intrigued and unnerved him. He wasn't entirely unaware of the risks. The other crew members on the Calliope would never understand his drive. After all, they were here to terraform, to bend Psi-6 to humanity's will. But Miles had his own mission in mind. His interest lay not in turning the world into something it wasn't, but in uncovering its buried history, especially the Zenith ruins that might hold answers to questions humankind hadn't even thought to ask. He was here to discover, to explore, and perhaps to escape everything he had left behind. The Calliope mission was clear: assess the terraform potential of Psi-6. The planet was a puzzle, one that needed humanity's ingenuity to solve. It was rich in resources, abundant in life, and its potential to sustain human colonies was undeniable. The terraformers aboard were eager to transform the world into something that could be molded into a human-friendly environment. Yet there was a catch. The planet was wild, and there were dangers no one could yet fully comprehend. But for Miles, terraform potential wasn't the true allure of Psi-6. Beneath the surface, there were other mysteries. Mysteries that beckoned him in ways that no official mission ever could. The Zenith ruins scattered across the jungles weren't just relics of a dead race. They held the promise of ancient knowledge, technology, and perhaps even something more. Something that might explain the planet's strange energies and magnetic anomalies. The mission leaders had set their sights firmly on terraforming. The rules were clear: assess the planet's climate, gauge the resources, and return with data to inform future colonization efforts. But Miles had his own priorities. The ruins were a temptation he couldn't resist. Disobeying mission protocol, he volunteered for a small descent pod mission, planning to investigate the ancient structures that lay hidden in the uncharted jungles. His team members, pragmatic and focused on the primary goal, had little interest in the zenith. To them, it was mere folklore. But to Miles, it was a rare chance to discover something that could reshape humanity's understanding of the universe. The question wasn't whether the planet could be terraformed, it was whether they were ready to unlock the secrets that lay beneath its surface. The descent had been calm, until it wasn't. The planet's atmosphere had seemed deceptively benign, the swirling energy of Sci-Fi's magnetic storms a distant concern. But in a moment, everything changed. The geomagnetic storm that had been predicted to arrive later that day hit early, and it hit hard. Miles and his small pod team barely had time to react before the first wave of energy slammed into their flight systems. The pod's controls flickered and failed. The electromagnetic interference scrambled the pod's navigation systems, rendering their instruments useless. Miles felt the sickening lurch of the ship as it veered off course, spinning uncontrollably. Panic erupted among the crew as they tried to regain control. The wind outside howled, a savage roar amplified by the magnetic pulses that ripped through the atmosphere. Miles' hands were steady, but even he couldn't deny the sinking dread in his stomach. The pod's descent was chaotic, spinning wildly as it plunged toward the dense jungle below. Outside, flashes of blinding light cracked across the sky, lightning too fierce to be natural. It wasn't just a storm, it was a force of nature, a violent storm that tore at the very fabric of reality. Then, without warning, the pod crashed into the jungle. The world went black. When Miles regained consciousness, he was alone. The pod's wreckage was scattered in pieces around him, smoke rising from the twisted remnants of technology. The rest of his team was gone. Whether they had survived the crash or perished in the storm was unknown. The jungle stretched before him, vast, silent, and watchful. Miles had been separated from the Calliope, from his crew, from everything he knew. In the chaos of the storm, the planet had claimed him. Alone now, Miles realized he wasn't just stranded. He was on his own in a world that refused to be understood. The crash had shattered him physically, but it was the silence afterward that threatened to undo him. Miles stirred in the wreckage, bruised and aching, his mind struggling to focus. His communication systems were fried, his instruments useless. For a long moment, all he could do was stare at the jungle around him, a vibrant, living thing that hummed with an energy he couldn't grasp. The air was thick, almost oppressive, and every breath felt like inhaling the unknown. He knew the survival odds weren't in his favor. The Calliope was too far away to reach, its location obscured by the planet's magnetic interference. The jungle was dense, its roots tangled beneath his feet like invisible tripwires. His initial instinct was to move, to find shelter, to find anything that might help him survive. But as he trekked deeper into the jungle, his mind began to twist. The vines were strange here, far too agile, swaying in ways that suggested more than just natural movement. The hum of the planet's energy seemed to vibrate in his bones, an unsettling rhythm that made him feel as if the world itself was watching him. His instincts screamed that he wasn't alone. The jungle was teeming with life, but it wasn't just the creatures that unnerved him. It was the feeling that something intelligent was observing him, something far beyond the primitive life forms that flitted through the trees. Was it paranoia, or had the storm unleashed something more than just chaos? Every step he took felt like a test. Every sound, every rustle in the bushes made him tense. The insects, odd, large, and rhythmic, sang in patterns, an eerie accompaniment to the silence of the jungle. Miles forced himself to keep moving, to ignore the sense of dread creeping up his spine. He was alive, for now. But how long would it last? And more importantly, what did Sci-Fi have in store for him? The jungle was alive in ways Miles couldn't yet understand. It breathed around him, a living thing, full of unseen eyes and minds that watched his every move. He had spent years studying alien ecosystems, but this was something else, something primal, something older. Each step he took felt like a challenge, a silent question to the planet. Will you let me stay? But the planet had no time for questions. The first attack came as he was making his way toward what he hoped was a safe distance from the wreckage of his pod. A sudden sound, a rustling in the underbrush, caught his attention just a split second before the creature struck. It was swift, too quick for Miles to register. A massive crystalline serpent, its translucent scales flashing like mirrors in the low light, shot toward him from the dense foliage. Its eyes were wide, multifaceted, like insect eyes, reflecting every color of the jungle in chaotic swirls. The serpent's long, sinuous body seemed to unfurl from the trees themselves, its jagged, sharp tail lashing the air as it approached. Miles barely had time to react as it struck. The creature's jaws opened wide, revealing rows of glistening, venomous fangs as it lunged for his throat. Instinct took over. Survival was always instinctual. Miles reached for the closest piece of wreckage, grabbing a jagged shard of metal and wielding it like a spear. The snake's fangs struck forward, but he was quicker. He thrust the sharp alloy directly into its underbelly, the force of the blow lodging it deep into the soft tissue beneath the crystalline scales. The serpent let out a piercing, high-pitched shriek before convulsing violently and falling limp at his feet. For a moment, there was only silence. Miles stood over the serpent, panting. Victory was fleeting. He had survived the first test, but the jungle's hunger was far from satisfied. The atmosphere around him felt charged, as though something else was watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. And Miles wasn't certain how much time he had before that moment came. Miles didn't waste time mourning the creature's defeat. Survival demanded focus, and the jungle didn't care about his fear or fatigue. The fire he needed wasn't just a source of warmth, it was a lifeline. The wind picked up again, carrying with it the faintest hints of a storm in the distance. The magnetic pulses, relentless and unpredictable, stirred the air like invisible fingers. Miles had to act quickly before the weather turned against him. The wreckage of his pod was scattered across a wide area, and though it was no longer useful for travel, it could still provide shelter. He worked quickly, tearing through what was left of the metal and cables, weaving the debris into a makeshift lean-to. A few strands of thick vine he'd seen earlier in the jungle provided some extra stability. It wasn't much, but it was enough to protect him from the elements for the night. Next came the fire. His first instinct had been to use the flares from the wreckage, but they were useless now, their chemical charges spent. Instead, he relied on his knowledge. 2 sharp stones, a bit of dried undergrowth, and a great deal of patience. He scraped the stones together, sparks flying into the dry leaves and twigs. It took several attempts, but the fire finally caught, flickering to life like a fragile, sputtering star in the dark. Miles knelt close, warming his hands, eyes scanning the jungle around him. The heat of the flames brought him a moment of peace. But that peace was short-lived. In the distance, something moved. Eyes, 2 glowing orbs reflecting from the dense underbrush, watched him with an eerie intensity. He wasn't alone. Something was out there, something that knew he was here, and Miles had no idea whether it was friend, foe, or something entirely different. The jungle had fallen silent, but the silence was suffocating. Miles could feel the weight of it pressing in on him, as though the world itself was holding its breath. The fire crackled, the only sound breaking the eerie quiet. Then the stillness was shattered, a rustle, a shift in the air. The ground trembled slightly as someone moved through the jungle. Miles didn't need to see them to know they were there. He could feel it deep in his gut. The jungle wasn't just alive, it was alive with purpose, and that purpose was about to reveal itself. From the shadows, towering figures emerged, their silhouettes monstrous against the dim glow of his fire. Women. No, not quite women, but something more. Their bodies were powerful, long-limbed, and adorned with bone armor, their faces painted with intricate markings. They moved with predatory grace, their steps deliberate and fluid. Miles's heart skipped a beat as he caught sight of their eyes, cold, piercing, and unblinking. They were hunters, and he was their prey. But these were no ordinary predators. They circled him like a pack of wolves, though their movements were far more calculated, far more deliberate. Miles stood motionless, not wanting to provoke them further. His spear, a crude weapon at best, seemed inadequate in the face of their strength. They were too fast, too skilled, and they didn't seem afraid of him. One of them, the largest, the most imposing, stepped forward, her eyes narrowing as she studied him. She said something in a guttural language, a series of sharp sounds that made his skin prickle with the unfamiliarity of it. Her expression softened, if only slightly, before she tilted her head, eyes never leaving him. Were they curious? Or did they see him as a threat? Miles couldn't tell, but he knew one thing. These were no mere beasts of the jungle. These were the Corexi, and they were not here to make peace. Miles' breath caught as the Corexi closed in around him, their movements so synchronized it felt like a coordinated dance. Before he could even think to run or fight, they had him, gripping his arms with unnatural strength, binding his legs with the same thick vines that had snared him earlier. Their hands were rough and sure, and they had no intention of letting him go. The leader of the group, the one who had spoken earlier, stepped closer. She wasn't just tall, she was towering, her bone armor clinking with every movement. Her eyes were silver, gleaming like twin moons in the dark. She reached out, placing a long, slender finger under his chin and tilting his face upward. Miles felt a chill run through him, not just from the cold, but from the raw power that radiated from her. In the distance, their camp appeared, an eerie collection of stone platforms, woven hides, and towering skeletal totems that rose from the jungle floor like remnants of a forgotten age. Miles was hauled through the underbrush, the jungle parting before them, as if it were guiding them to this strange, ancient place. The sounds of the jungle faded as they reached the heart of their settlement. At the camp, Miles was thrown to the ground. He could barely comprehend the strange rituals that unfolded before him. The Corexi surrounded him, chanting in a language that felt older than time. They prodded and measured him, their eyes moving over him with a mix of awe and caution. Miles was an enigma to them, a foreign being, a curiosity. They studied his biology, his muscles, his skin. They touched his face, ran their fingers through his hair. There was a fascination in their movements, an almost reverent quality, as if they were uncovering some forgotten mystery. Miles tried to make sense of it, but his mind was too overwhelmed by the flood of sensory information. Why had they brought him here? What did they want from him? He had no answers, only questions. Miles had seen many powerful figures in his life, but none like Jathra. She towered over him, her presence so overwhelming it was like the air around her bent to her will. She was beautiful in a way that was beyond human comprehension, her skin dark as the jungle night, her eyes silver and unblinking, gleaming like twin moons in the shadows. She moved like a force of nature, the very embodiment of the jungle's ancient power. Jathra didn't speak immediately. Instead, she observed him, her gaze intense and calculating. Her eyes seemed to pierce right through him, as if she were seeing something deeper than his physical form. The silence between them stretched on, thick and heavy, before she finally broke it. "Sky Beast," she murmured, her voice low and resonant. "The prophecy has spoken." Miles's heart skipped a beat. Sky Beast? The words rattled through his mind, but they made no sense. What was she talking about? He wasn't a beast. He was human. Was the days that followed Miles's capture were brutal, unrelenting in their intensity. To the Corexi, survival was not a simple matter. It was a trial of strength, endurance, and spirit. Each of these tests was a way for Miles to prove himself, not just to the tribe, but to the planet itself. And the jungle had no mercy for those who were weak. The first trial came at dawn, a challenge to his most primal instincts. He was forced to hunt without tools, armed only with his hands and the knowledge he had acquired over years of studying alien species. His first prey, a wild boar-like creature, its hide tough as stone, was faster than he anticipated. Miles chased it through the thick underbrush, his breath ragged, the sweat stinging his eyes. It was a fight of wills. He knew that if he failed, the tribe would view him as weak, unworthy. Finally, he cornered it, using his body to tackle it to the ground. The creature struggled, but Miles held it down, snapping its neck with a precision he hadn't known he was capable of. The second trial tested his endurance. The Corexi used a hallucinogenic plant, which they crushed into a paste and forced Miles to ingest. His body immediately reacted, sending him into a fevered trance. Colors exploded before his eyes, and the jungle seemed to melt into a swirl of voices, visions, and fears. He fought to keep control of his senses, clinging to the mantra his mind repeated. Survive. Survive. Hours passed in this altered state before he finally collapsed from exhaustion, only to awaken with the sun high in the sky. The Corexi looked down at him with calculating eyes, but there was a spark of respect in their gaze. The final trial was symbolic. Branding. They seared his skin with a jagged bone tool, marking him with the symbol of the Sky Beast. It was a ritual that sealed his fate, for better or worse. Miles barely flinched as the mark was pressed into his flesh. Pain was fleeting, the consequences of failure, eternal. The scars were not just on his skin, they were on his soul. Through blood, sweat, and pain, Miles earned his place among the Corexi. He had survived. But survival, he soon learned, was only the beginning. Amidst the grueling trials, there was one who observed Miles closely. Siva. She was unlike the others, silent and watchful, her movements as fluid as the jungle itself. She had no need for words, communicating instead through a complex set of gestures that Miles slowly began to learn. Her dark eyes held an intelligence that unnerved him, and there was an edge of something deeper beneath the surface, a distrust, a wariness. Yet despite her cold demeanor, she never let him falter during the trials. She'd appear at the edge of his vision just when he needed guidance most, offering him an unspoken warning or a subtle nudge. Miles had noticed the tension between Siva and Jathra. Siva, it seemed, was not fully convinced of Miles's role in the Corexi prophecy. While Jathra saw him as a symbol of the Sky Beast, either destroyer or rebirth, Siva saw him as a potential danger. Her resistance to the prophecy was clear, though she never voiced it. Instead, she worked in silence, guarding him from the more zealous members of the tribe who were eager to believe in the myth. One evening, as Miles sat by the fire, Siva approached him and drew symbols in the dirt with a stick. They were crude but clear. You cannot trust them. Beware the prophecy. Her message was cryptic but undeniable. Siva was warning him, not just of the dangers that came with being the Sky Beast, but of the divisions growing within the tribe. There were those who wanted him to fulfill the prophecy, and those who saw him as a threat to everything they had built. Her warning settled heavily in his chest. He was no longer just a stranger in the jungle. He was a symbol of something far greater, something that could tear the tribe apart. The tribe's beliefs were as ingrained in their culture as the very soil beneath their feet. And when Miles, in his desperation to prove himself, used his medical knowledge to heal a child, everything changed. It started when a young Corexi girl, no older than 10 cycles, fell ill. The symptoms were similar to a disease Miles had encountered on another planet, a bacterial infection that could have easily claimed the girl's life. Siva, always watching, saw the opportunity and dragged Miles to the girl's side. The child was weak, pale, her breathing shallow. Without hesitation, Miles sprang into action. He used the small medical supplies he'd salvaged from the wreckage, antibiotics, a basic surgical kit, and his knowledge of alien biology. The tribe watched in awe as he worked, his hands steady despite the tension in the air. When the girl opened her eyes and smiled for the first time in days, a murmur spread through the tribe. They had witnessed something extraordinary, something they could not explain. To them, it was no longer just a matter of survival. The Sky Beast had healed the child. The divine had touched them. Jathra was the first to react, her eyes wide with awe. To her, this was a sign. The prophecy was unfolding before her eyes. But Siva, standing behind her, was not as convinced. She narrowed her eyes at Miles, her hands clenched into fists. To her, this wasn't divine. It was dangerous. She knew that the Corexi had lived by their traditions for eons, and they had never needed outsiders, never needed the kind of knowledge Miles brought with him. As the tribe debated the meaning of the healing, factions began to form. Some viewed Miles as a divine messenger, a sign that the prophecy was true. Others, led by Siva, saw him as a threat, someone who could unravel everything they had fought to preserve. The balance of power within the tribe was shifting, and Miles was at the center of it. Miles didn't expect to find anything more than a relic. When he first stumbled upon the zenith structure hidden beneath the Corexi's holy site, he thought it was just another piece of ancient history, something that had long been forgotten. But when his fingers brushed against the cool surface of the black stone, something stirred within him. The structure wasn't just a monument or a temple. It was something far more intricate. As his hand made contact, a soft hum vibrated through the air, an almost imperceptible sound, like a distant heartbeat. The hum grew louder, resonating with a strange energy, and Miles felt a jolt of something unfamiliar. The walls of the structure shifted, revealing hidden panels. Symbols, alien and intricate, glowed faintly across the surface. The technology responded to him as if it had been waiting for him, recognizing his DNA, his presence in ways that Miles couldn't comprehend. He hesitated. This wasn't just a discovery, it was a revelation. The Corexi knew the Zenith as gods, as mythological figures who had once ruled the stars. But now Miles realized that the technology buried beneath their feet wasn't just a relic, it was alive. The dormant systems sprang to life, activating with a sudden, quiet efficiency. Holographic projections flickered to life before him, showing images of star maps, long-forgotten blueprints, and technologies beyond the Corexi's wildest imaginations. It was as though the entire Zenith Empire was awakening, and Miles had become its key. The implications were staggering. The Corexi barely remembered the Zenith, let alone their technology. Miles realized with a growing sense of awe and dread that he now held the key to a power that could reshape the very fabric of their society. But with it came a responsibility that could fracture everything. As the days passed, the tension within the tribe reached a boiling point. Miles was no longer just a captive or a curious outsider. He was something else, something that threatened to tear the Corexi world apart. And then the news came. A wandering scout covered in the dust of the wilds arrived at the tribe's camp with urgent news. Koresh, a warlord who had been banished years ago for his violent ambitions, had returned. He had gathered a new tribe, a ruthless band of outcasts, and he was marching toward the Corexi camp with one goal in mind: to claim the sky beast for himself. The scout spoke with trembling fear as he described Koresh's growing army. They were savage, bloodthirsty, and determined to conquer the Corexi and any who stood in their way. Miles's heart pounded in his chest as he processed the information. Koresh was a force to be reckoned with. His reputation had spread far beyond the jungle. The jungle, once a place of serene beauty, erupted in chaos as Koresh's army descended like a storm. His warriors, hardened by years of scavenging and combat, came armed with weapons that had never been seen before in the Corexi world. Advanced Zenith technology, forgotten for centuries, was now in the hands of those who sought nothing less than domination. Miles, hidden deep within the foliage, could hear the unmistakable hum of energy, harpoons cutting through the air. Koresh's soldiers fired them into the thick canopy, bringing down massive trees with terrifying ease. The energy pulses tore through the jungle like a scythe, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. The sound of crackling flames followed closely behind, as Koresh's flame droppers unleashed torrents of fire, turning the once lush landscape into a smoldering inferno. The jungle groaned, protesting against the assault, but it had no defense against such power. The Corexi warriors, relying on their tribal skills and bone weapons, were outmatched in the face of Koresh's advanced technology. Their spears and arrows, effective against beasts of the jungle, were no match for the energy blasts that shredded through their defenses. Panic set in among the Corexi, but their matriarch Jathra fought on, leading her people with unwavering resolve. Miles, unable to ignore the violence unfolding before him, realized that the war had gone far beyond the petty squabbles of tribes. The jungle was no longer a sanctuary, it was a battleground. The land he had come to call home was now a war zone, where the lives of everyone in the Corexi and Koresh's forces hung in the balance. Koresh was no mere invader. He was a conqueror, and he would stop at nothing to seize the one thing that could bring him absolute power: the Sky Beast, the symbol of both death and rebirth. Miles had never asked to be a symbol. He had never asked to be the key to a prophecy or to be at the center of a conflict that threatened to tear the Corexi apart. But now, standing amidst the chaos of war, he realized he was no longer just a man. To the Corexi, he was the Sky Beast, the harbinger of either salvation or destruction. He was a living totem, a figure who transcended the ordinary and was now tied to the fate of an entire tribe. Both sides saw him as the catalyst for victory. Jathra, in her final moments of clarity, had come to believe that Miles was the answer to the Corexi's survival. In her eyes, he was more than just a man. He was a divine instrument, capable of turning the tide of battle. She believed that if Miles embraced the prophecy, if he accepted his role as the Sky Beast, they would stand a chance against Koresh. On the other side, Koresh viewed Miles as nothing more than a tool. To him, the Sky Beast was a weapon, an untapped force that could be harnessed to destroy the Corexi and cement his rule over the jungle. If Koresh could capture Miles, he would have everything he needed to crush the opposition and claim dominance over the land. But Miles refused to be used. He could not, in good conscience, allow himself to become a pawn in a game he didn't understand. He wasn't a god. He wasn't a weapon. He was a man caught between two warring factions, trying desperately to hold on to his humanity in a world that demanded he be something else. As the jungle burned and the tribes clashed, Miles made a silent vow to himself. He would not be anyone's tool. He would fight for his survival, yes, but he would not let the jungle turn him into a living weapon. He would find another way, a way that didn't involve the myth that had been built around him. The Hollow Ridge was a place of legend to the Corexi. It was where the first of their people had come to rest, a place sacred to their ancestors. But now it had become a battleground, a killing field where the fate of the Corexi and the future of the jungle were to be decided. Miles stood at the edge of the ridge, his heart pounding in his chest as the war raged around him. Koresh's army had pushed deep into Corexi territory, and the two forces were now locked in a deadly clash. The ground trembled beneath their feet as Koresh's weapons tore through the jungle, sending trees crashing to the ground. The Corexi fought back with their bone spears and primitive tools, but their strength was no match for the firepower Koresh had brought with him. The battle was a brutal dance of death, and it seemed as though there was no hope for the Corexi. But Miles had never been one to back down from a challenge. He had learned from his time in the jungle, studying the land and its creatures. He knew that the jungle could be more than just a backdrop to war. It could be a weapon in itself. With the help of a few Corexi warriors, Miles set to work crafting traps. The first was a spore bomb, a simple device that would release a hallucinogenic cloud when triggered. The spores, when inhaled, would disorient anyone caught in their path, blurring their vision and slowing their movements. It was a small victory, but one that bought the Corexi time. As Koresh's soldiers staggered in confusion, the Corexi took advantage of their disorientation, striking from the shadows. The second trap was more elaborate, a series of rolling stones set up along a narrow pass. Miles had carefully positioned boulders, using vines and ropes to create a precarious barrier. When Koresh's soldiers advanced, Miles triggered the trap. The boulders came crashing down, knocking several of Koresh's warriors off their feet and disrupting their lines. The confusion was palpable as the soldiers scrambled to regroup. But the most effective trap was one Miles had devised using the jungle's natural predators. He had studied the creatures of the jungle, learning their habits and their hunger. He set up a series of lures, pieces of meat and the scent of blood, to attract the predators into the fray. The creatures, sleek, fast, and deadly, attacked without hesitation. They tore into the invaders with terrifying precision, creating chaos among Koresh's soldiers. The battle was madness, a whirlwind of fire, blood, and betrayal. But amidst it all, Miles remained focused. He wasn't just fighting for survival, he was fighting for something greater. The hope that the Corexi could survive, that they could break free from the cycle of destruction that had defined their existence for so long. In the heat of battle, Miles realized that he could never be just a symbol. He was a man, a warrior, and a leader. And in that moment, he understood that it was not the prophecy that would save the Corexi. It was their unity, their willingness to fight together. The battle raged on, but the tide was beginning to turn. The Corexi had held their ground thanks to Miles's traps and their own fierce determination. But the cost had been high. Many Corexi warriors had fallen, and their ranks were thinning. Jathra, their matriarch, had fought with all the strength she could muster, but her age and injuries were catching up with her. As Miles fought beside her, he could see the weariness in her eyes, the signs that she could no longer carry the weight of her people alone. It was then that Koresh made his final push, rallying his warriors for one last assault. He had set his sights on Miles, hoping to capture the Sky Beast and bring an end to the Korexi's resistance. Jathra, realizing the danger, threw herself into the fray, her bone armor glinting in the firelight. She was a force to be reckoned with, but even the greatest warriors have their limits. As Koresh's soldiers swarmed around them, Jathra fought with the fury of a cornered beast. She struck down two of Koresh's soldiers with brutal precision, but they were too many. They overwhelmed her, and Miles could only watch in horror as the matriarch was brought to the ground. Koresh stood over her, his weapon raised for the final blow. But in that moment, Jathra's eyes locked onto Miles. She was smiling, her face a mask of both sorrow and pride. "Remember, you are not a god," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the din of battle. "You are one of us." With those words, Jathra fell, her body crumpling to the ground. Miles rushed to her side, but it was too late. She was gone, her sacrifice sealing her fate. Jathra's death was a turning point for the Corexi. Her passing left a void, but it also sparked something in the hearts of the remaining warriors. They knew they had lost their matriarch, but they had. As the years wore on, Miles had become more than just a survivor to the Corexi. He had become a symbol. His presence was as ingrained in their culture as their ancient rituals. His legacy etched in the very bones of the jungle. The stories of the Sky Beast, of the man from the stars who had fallen from the heavens and brought them salvation, had become intertwined with the tribe's identity. His face was painted on the walls of their dwellings, his form woven into the fabric of their sacred ceremonies. To them he was as much a part of the land as the vines that grew through the trees or the winds that whispered through the leaves. Yet Miles never truly felt at home here. Despite the honor and respect bestowed upon him, the quiet loneliness never left. The Corexi had given him a place in their world, but it was not the world he had known. He still dreamed of Earth, of the cities, the people, and the technology that once defined his life. He longed for the hum of human civilization, the comfort of a world that was familiar, even in its chaos. The jungle had become his refuge and his prison. Its beauty was intoxicating, its dangers thrilling, but it was not Earth. And so, in the quiet moments, when the night sky stretched above him like a canvas of unknown stars, Miles would find himself gazing into the distance, his mind wandering back to a time long gone. Earth was a memory that had slipped through his fingers, but it still tugged at his heart. He had found peace among the Corexi. Yes, but it was a peace that came with a cost. He was bound to them, yet forever separated from the world that had once been his home. Siva's rise to power had been inevitable. She was the heir to Jathra's mantle, the last of the ancient matriarchs, yet she had taken on the mantle not with pride, but with a deep, thoughtful silence. She was a leader of a different kind. A leader not bound by tradition, but one who saw the necessity for change, for evolution. She recognized the potential in Miles, not just as a warrior or as a man, but as a bridge between her people and the outside world, the world that Miles came from. Her offer to him was a rare one, an offer that transcended politics, an invitation to become something more than a consort. She did not want him by her side because of his strength, nor did she seek him as a trophy or as a tool to solidify her power. Instead, she wanted him because he was a symbol of something new, something that could help the Corexi evolve into something greater than they had ever been before. Miles's presence had already changed them, but he could not shake the feeling that, in accepting her offer, he would become part of a larger destiny. Siva did not want him as a husband in the traditional sense. She wanted him as an equal, as a partner in shaping the future of the Corexi. It was a union of necessity and diplomacy, a bridge between two worlds, one ancient, one modern. But the choice was not an easy one. To accept was to remain here, to become part of a world that was not his own. It was a chance to build something new, something meaningful, but it was also a resignation of everything he had once known. Could he leave Earth behind forever? Could he truly embrace this new life, this new purpose among the Corexi? The sudden flare that lit up the sky like a beacon from another time was a sight that Miles could scarcely believe. It was as though the universe had decided to intervene, to pull him back to the life he had once known, the life he had thought was lost forever. The storm that had long kept Earth's signals from reaching Sci-Fi had finally calmed, and a ship, human, familiar, had breached the chaos of the atmosphere. The voice that crackled through the static was unmistakably human, and Miles's heart raced as the words reached his ears. "Survivors on Sci-Fi, we're here. We've come for you." Miles stood at the edge of the jungle, his eyes locked on the flare that rose into the sky, its orange glow flickering against the darkening horizon. A ship, Earth. He could almost taste it, the promise of going home. The voice in his mind was loud and clear now. "You can go back. You don't have to stay here anymore." For years he had waited for this moment, had hoped that somehow Earth would reach him, would send someone to bring him back. And now it was happening. The universe had offered him an out, a return to the world he had left behind. He could go home, back to the familiar, back to the people he knew, the technology, the life he once thought was his future. He could feel the pull of it like a magnetic force, tugging him toward a decision that was already becoming clearer. Yet even as the ship neared, even as the voices from Earth grew louder in his mind, Miles could not shake the feeling that this moment was a turning point. The flare was more than just a signal. It was a challenge, an ultimatum. Could he truly leave all that he had built here? Could he walk away from the Corexi, from Siva, from the life he had created in the jungle? Miles held the tablet in his hands, the blinking cursor staring back at him, waiting for him to make a decision. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, and for the first time since his arrival on Sci-Fi, he truly felt the enormity of the choice before him. He had two messages to send, two paths to choose from, and each would change his life forever. The first message was simple and clear. It was a message to Earth, a signal of hope and survival. Survived, coordinates ready. It was a message that would bring him home, a message that would reunite him with humanity, with his family, with the life he had once known. It was the logical choice, the safe choice, the choice that made sense. Earth was his home, his birthright. It was the world he had left, but it was the world he had never truly abandoned in his heart. The second message was more complicated, more final. It was a message that signified a choice to stay, to embrace the life he had built with the Corexi. It was a message of acceptance, of belonging, but it also meant severing his ties to Earth forever. No rescue needed. Found home. Miles closed his eyes, feeling the weight of both messages. The first promised a return to the world he had known, but the second held the possibility of a new beginning, of a future in a world that was not his own. The jungle, the Corexi, Siva, these were all a part of him now, but so was Earth. How could he choose between two worlds that had both shaped him in different ways? The beacon flashed again, its light cutting through the darkness like a call from the past. Miles took a deep breath and placed both messages into separate beacon capsules, feeling the finality of his decision weigh heavily on his soul. He had come so far, and now it was time to decide. What future would he choose? Years had passed since Miles Carter's fateful decision on Sci-Fi, and the world he left behind had blossomed into something extraordinary. The scouts who ventured through the now calm storms of Sci-Fi could scarcely believe what they found. The jungle that once seemed alien and wild had been tamed in the most breathtaking of ways. Towering structures, part Corexi bone and part human steel, spiraled upward like massive living sculptures. Fusion-powered vines twisted and pulsed with an ethereal glow, their luminescence casting long shadows over the vibrant cities below. The once warring factions of the Corexi and humans had long since been united, their cultures interwoven into something entirely new. The Corexi's ancient tribal knowledge had been married with human ingenuity, creating a hybrid civilization unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The cities were not built on conquest or dominance, but on survival, cooperation, and the shared vision of two peoples who had come to understand one another at their deepest core. What had started as an unlikely bond between a stranded exobiologist and an ancient alien race had now become the beating heart of a new civilization, a place where the strength of bone met the wisdom of the stars, and where the jungle no longer held terror, but hope. The spiral cities stood as a testament to that hope, rising out of the earth like living symbols of unity. On the streets of the spiral cities, children played, their laughter ringing through the air like music. They spoke in two tongues, one from the stars, the other from the jungle. The hybrid dialect was a beautiful fusion of human language and Corexi inflection, a language that reflected the unity that had been forged in the fires of survival. The children's games were a mix of old rituals and new imaginings. They mimicked the ancient blood rites of the Corexi, but with holographic star lore projected in the night sky, a reminder of the ancestors' legacy and the knowledge that had been passed down. It was a beautiful thing, this blending of traditions. The rituals were still sacred, but they had evolved, morphed into something that carried the wisdom of the past while embracing the potential of the future. Miles Carter's name was spoken often in the streets, not as a god, but as a founder. He had laid the groundwork for a new world, not by subjugating the land or its people, but by listening, adapting, and surviving. His story had become a legend, woven into the fabric of the city, its songs sung not in praise but in remembrance. From atop the cliffs that overlooked the spiral cities, a tall figure in shimmering armor stood still, watching the human scouts below. His armor was sleek and metallic, but streaked with the intricate, organic patterns of Corexi bone. His eyes gleamed faintly with zenith light, a reminder of the ancient technology that had intertwined with his being. He was a man of legend now, an enigmatic figure who had never fully returned to the world he had helped shape. Miles Carter had become something more than just a survivor. He had become a symbol, a myth. The people of the spiral cities knew him only by the stories passed down from their elders, tales of the sky beast who had fallen from the heavens and taught them how to survive, how to live together. The figure watched for a moment longer, his silhouette outlined against the setting sun, before he turned silently and disappeared into the forest once more. Earth had not forgotten Sci-Fi. The humans who had once been so eager to abandon their troubled world had found themselves inextricably linked to the Corexi and their new civilization. Diplomatic missions were sent, and the planet was slowly introduced to the larger galactic community. When Earth finally recognized the Corexi human civilization as a sovereign entity, it was a decision born of respect. Respect for the way these two races had come together, not through conquest or greed, but through the shared struggle for survival. Trade routes were established, and a new age of cooperation began. Human engineers and Corexi artisans exchanged knowledge, creating new technologies and cultural expressions that were the envy of the galaxy. The Corexi had finally become more than just a footnote in history. They had become allies. Miles Carter's name was whispered across the stars, not as a conqueror, but as the first human to seed peace, not through the force of arms, but through the strength of survival. He had given humanity something far more precious than mere territory or resources. He had given them the opportunity to evolve alongside another species, to find unity in a galaxy that had so often been defined by conflict. And in doing so, Miles had rewritten history itself, leaving behind a legacy that would endure for millennia to come.